This is The World This Weekend. Good evening, I'm Chris O'Neill Yates. Tonight, a horrific act of violence in an Ontario suburb leaves 2 people dead.
None of the people involved in this incident were known to police, making this perhaps a little bit more shocking for all of us.
Also tonight,
Are you confident this deal will get to your desk?
Yes.
the U.S. is poised to stave off a financial disaster if Republican and Democrat lawmakers can agree on the details. And an upcoming Broadway show shines a spotlight on the legacy of the Marcos dictatorship, and it's got an all-Filipino cast.
This is the first time I'm getting to play my own heritage, so I feel like I don't have to hide.
That's later, but first. A community in Hamilton, Ontario is left stunned tonight after a double murder and a police standoff that has left 3 people dead. 2 of the deceased, a 28-year-old man and a 27-year-old woman, were shot as they fled a residence. The CBC's Philip Lee Shannock has the details.
Thought it was kids, but it was a different kind of scream.
Mary Frazakerle and her daughter knew from the sound that something bad was happening yesterday afternoon. So they went to investigate what was going on a neighboring property.
But we didn't see anything, and then when we looked, we seen people running, and they said there's a lady with a purple shirt lying lifeless, and she's being shot.
Glenn Bannister says he also heard a commotion, so he went to see what was happening across the street. Then he says he ran for his life.
Well, I ran for cover, and then I wasn't sure what was happening. I heard like 6 or 10 shots, and then zing, 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 they were flying by, and I just ran across the street. I was terrified.
Hamilton Police Detective Sergeant Steve Bereziak says first responders arrived and found 2 bodies on the front lawn. They'd both been shot and killed.
They were observed by witnesses fleeing the house, and they were killed outside of the residence.
He says a suspect had barricaded himself in the home with at least 1 firearm. Police say the landlord was the licensed owner of several handguns and long guns.
He's 57-year-old suspect shot and killed 2 victims, 27 and 28 years old. Both were residing here at this address. It's our information at this point in time in the investigation that this was a landlord-tenant dispute, and there was a disagreement surrounding issues within the house, which led to their murders.
Bereziak says the 27-year-old woman worked as an educational assistant for a local Catholic school board, and the 28-year-old man worked as an electrician in Hamilton. He says they were engaged to be married. The landlord was renting the lower part of his house to them. Bereziak says they were arguing about the condition of the home.
None of the people involved in this incident were known to police, making this perhaps a little bit more shocking for all of us.
Police say after hours of trying to negotiate a peaceful ending, the man opened fire at officers in an armored vehicle. Monica Huden is with Ontario's Special Investigations Unit.
There was an exchange of gunfire between the man and a police officer. The man was struck and he was pronounced deceased at the scene.
The provincial police watchdog is called in when a member of the public is injured or killed by police. Huden says 1 subject officer and 6 witness officers are part of the investigation. Philip Lee Shannock, CBC News, Toronto.
Alberta's provincial election campaign is approaching the finish line. Voters will decide tomorrow whether United Conservative Danielle Smith will keep her job as Premier or if the NDP's Rachel Notley will get a second shot in the top job. Whoever wins will have to tackle mounting problems, from a rural doctor shortage to affordability and the ongoing threat of wildfires. Aaron Collins reports tonight from Alberta's biggest electoral battleground, Calgary.
Spring is in the air at this Calgary bike track. A sunny Sunday off for most, time for a trip to the park, not politics.
It's just cool to just chill and relax and do nothing, watch your kids do their thing.
Still, a tight race during Alberta's election means the ups and downs of the campaign are unavoidable, even here.
Healthcare is obviously, I think, a huge front runner for us, and family doctor availability.
Mostly just economics, and we want to make sure that the province stays in good economic health.
And then obviously, more spending on education, trying to get fewer kids per class.
It's not a day off for the politicians hoping to win tomorrow. Rachel Notley campaigning in Calgary over the weekend.
Alberta is going to choose a better future and a better government.
The party's support highly divided along urban-rural lines. Notley's NDP needs to win big here to have a chance of forming government. United Conservative leader Danielle Smith also needs as many Calgary seats as possible to come out on top.
Every single vote is going to make a difference on Election Day.
Prominent Conservatives like former Prime Minister Stephen Harper turning up on social media, making a final push for Calgary UCP candidates like Tyler Shandro.
In Calgary, Acadia, get out to the polls on Monday and please re-elect Tyler Shandro.
A recent poll suggests the UCP may be edging ahead, but most political watchers say it's still very close in battleground Calgary. It's why getting out the vote will be key to both parties, according to Mount Royal University political scientist Lori Williams.
I think it's going to come down to voter turnout, and so that's where the ground game comes in. The so-called ground game means going out and getting your voters to make it to the polls and make sure they vote for you. And that's what's going on right now.
Back at the bike park after a rough and tumble campaign, the focus for these voters is on moving forward, no matter who wins.
We're all have the rights to our own opinions, and I think we'd be better off if we all listened to each other a little bit more and had a little less adversity.
Election day here in Calgary and across Alberta gets rolling tomorrow. Aaron Collins, CBC News, Calgary.
The number of wildfires in Alberta has grown slightly in the past 24 hours. 58 fires are now burning in the province. 17 are considered out of control. Alberta Wildfire says an area twice the size of PEI has already burned this year. In the Maritimes, 2 fires are threatening communities in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. The RCMP says there is a rapid-moving fire in a subdivision of Upper Tantallon. That's about 30 kilometers west of Halifax. The Mounties say the flames have engulfed a number of homes. An evacuation order is in place for the residents. Another fire broke out in communities near St. Andrews in the southwestern area of New Brunswick. The mayor says emergency crews are going door to door to issue evacuation orders. Republicans and Democrats are dissecting the details of a bill to raise the U.S. debt ceiling and avoid an historic default. The fine print is being finalized today, but the drama isn't quite over just yet. The bill still needs to pass through Congress. The CBC's Magda Gebrselassie is in Washington and has more on the road ahead.
Are you confident this deal will get to your desk?
Yes.
Confident that the debt ceiling deal will go all the way. That's what President Joe Biden told reporters as he arrived back at the White House today. The deal reportedly lifts the borrowing limit and freezes non-defense spending for 2 years.
I think people will look back.
Republican House Leader Kevin McCarthy says it's a step in the right direction.
We know at any time when you sit and negotiate within 2 parties that you got to work with both sides of the aisle. So it's not 100% what everybody wants, but when you look, the country is going to be stronger. This is going to be transformational, where Congress is literally going to vote to spend less money this year than we spent last year.
This as the U.S. is just days away from not being able to pay its bills.
What's being negotiated?
Landing a deal to avoid that is a miracle, says Republican Governor for New Hampshire, Chris Sununu.
I give both Kevin McCarthy and the Democrat side credit for actually getting something done and not waiting till 11:59, so to say.
But not everyone is applauding the deal. Some conservatives say this will only add trillions of dollars of debt with minimal spending restrictions, while some Democrats worry about the expanding work requirements for some people to access government assistance for things like food stamps.
Very bad policy.
Democratic Congressional Progressive Caucus Chair Pramila Jayapal.
We've seen reams of data that show that when you put these work requirements in, they're really just administrative red tape that prevent the people who need help from getting help.
While there may be some criticism from both sides, this is a win for Americans, says political commentator and former Democratic South Carolina House Representative Bakari Sellers.
For American people, they're going to be like, I don't understand half of the things that are going on in this debate. However, I do know if we default, the stock market's going to go down. Right. Things are going to get more difficult for my pocketbook. I'm going to see my investments plummet.
The legislation will need to pass the House and the Senate, and Democratic and Republican leadership seem confident they'll get the votes, and Biden will get to sign the bill putting an end to the debt ceiling crisis. Magda Gebrselassie, CBC News, Washington.
The results are in for Turkey's runoff presidential election, and Recep Tayyip Erdogan has claimed victory. He's already been president for 20 years. This second round of voting took place because round one was very close. This time, Erdogan won by 52% of the vote. As the CBC's Briar Stewart tells us, the results reveal a very divided country.
Kimse kaybetmeyecek demiştik.
Recep Tayyip Erdogan declared victory from the top of a campaign bus in Istanbul, saying the real winner tonight was Turkey. Erdogan is a world leader, said one of his supporters. There's nothing else to say. After Erdogan cast his ballot today, he handed out cash to some of his supporters, something he's frequently been doing on special occasions. The populist leader was up against a six-party opposition alliance led by Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, who tried to increase traction with voters by promising to send millions of Syrian refugees back home. Some opposition supporters saw the pledge as pure politics, including Güney, a businessman who would only give his first name.
I don't really support that refugees must go, but if it helps us to win that election, we have to say this.
But it didn't help the opposition win. Instead, tonight they vowed to keep fighting for democracy. Erdogan, who's been accused by some of mismanaging the economy and driving up inflation, campaigned on making the country stronger.
And I think that his voters like this idea. Making Turkey great again has an appeal.
Ali Adin-Tashbash is a visiting fellow at the Washington, D.C.-based Brookings Institution. She says Erdogan's election has implications for the global community. Turkey is a member of NATO but has a somewhat fractious relationship with the alliance. She says throughout Erdogan's campaign, he and his team accused the president of the United States of trying to meddle in the election.
They've accused the opposition of being backed by the U.S. So geopolitically, I think he will see this as a public support for the idea of a Turkey that's non-aligned, no longer a member of the transatlantic community, but a country that also deals with Russia, deals with its own regional partners.
While Turkey's growing trade ties with Russia has caused concern among some Western officials, Erdogan has also been praised for his work in helping to negotiate the Black Sea grain deal. Tonight, Russia's President Vladimir Putin congratulated his, quote, dear friend Erdogan on his win. And Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky congratulated him too, saying he hopes the countries can develop their cooperation when it comes to the security and stability of Europe. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
Female wrestlers and hundreds of their supporters marched in the scorching 45-degree temperature today in the Indian capital. The wrestlers have been protesting for a month in Delhi. A number of them have accused the head of the country's wrestling federation, Brij Bhushan Singh, of sexual harassment and called for his arrest. Singh is also a longtime member of parliament in India's ruling BJP. He denies the allegations. Police moved in to break up the march, which was making its way to India's new parliament building being inaugurated today. They detained two high-profile Olympic medalist wrestlers, including Sakshi Malik, who spoke to reporters through the window of a police bus. This is wrong, says Malik. Daughters are being murdered. We were walking quietly. They dragged us forcefully and detained us, and they're not even telling us where we will be taken. Another wrestler, Vinesh Phogat, expressed disgust at the detentions. Brij Bhushan is sitting in parliament, she says, and we are being arrested. Meanwhile, the scene inside India's new parliament building could not have been more different. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi performed a number of Hindu rituals, including having holy men, sadhus, bless the gold scepter, symbolizing a transfer of power.
ये नया भवन आत्मनिर्भर भारत के
Modi told the parliament, "This is the temple of our democracy, giving the message of India's determination to the world." But parliamentarians from 19 opposition parties boycotted the ceremony. They say that the president, as head of state, should have been the one to inaugurate parliament, accusing Modi of treating the event like a coronation, and for holding it on the anniversary of V.D. Savarkar, who developed the Hindu nationalist ideology, or Hindutva, who the opposition sees as a polarizing figure. Supriya Sule is an MP from the Congress Party.
It's very painful for me, for somebody who is so proud of our Indian Parliament and our democracy. And democracy is called a democracy when there is an opposition. So to have such a large event and open a new parliament building without an opposition, it does not mean there is a democracy in this country. It's an incomplete event.
India's new parliament building is part of the BJP's makeover of government structures from the British colonial era. Russia unleashed a major drone attack early this morning on Kyiv, just as Ukraine's capital was preparing for a day to celebrate its founding. Russia launched more than 40 drones that were down in Kyiv's airspace that covered a wide area of the city. Ukraine's military says its air defenses brought down most of the drones. At least 2 people were killed and several injured. From St. John's to Victoria, the mayors of some of Canada's biggest cities say their residents are struggling to find affordable housing. At a conference this weekend, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau teased a new housing plan. One, he says, will come in the fall. But as Kate McKenna reports, Canadians say the situation is already dire.
That's so not affordable. Like, housing is just insane.
Danielle Lafon's rent more than doubled in 10 years. The Surrey, BC resident says she's barely making ends meet.
I'm on disability. I can't afford $1,300 a month. I had to move in somebody with me so that I could afford just to live.
Surrey's population is booming, and that's driving up the cost of housing. But Canadians across the country are feeling the squeeze. The housing crisis took center stage at a meeting of Canada's big city mayors. Montreal was one of the last bastions of cheap rent, but its Mayor Valérie Plante says times have changed.
People cannot find a roof on top of their head and they're coming and cry. Those are faces, those are real people.
Halifax Mayor Mike Savage called for a change in vision and a change in funding to address it.
Municipalities already are responsible for 60% of infrastructure and collect 8 to 10% of the taxes. And while federal coffers and provincial coffers have been swelling in recent years since the recovery of COVID,
we need to increase the supply of housing. It's that simple.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was criticized earlier this spring when there was little in his government's budget to lower housing prices. On Friday, he teased a new project.
Our next long-term infrastructure plan will be revealed this fall. And like with public transit, I can share with you today that this funding will have very direct links to housing.
But that didn't do much to quell concerns of the opposition. Melissa Lantzman is a Conservative Party deputy leader. She gave a keynote at the meeting of the mayors.
So the problems that we are facing with supply, with price, with density are only going to keep getting worse. And it's fundamentally clear that something has to change because we can't keep going down this path. That's crazy.
For LaFond in Surrey, she's worried if nothing changes, an already bad situation could get worse.
Where are my kids going to be when they're ready to live on their own? My youngest is 10. So in 10 years, what's it going to be?
She says policymakers need to use whatever's in their toolbox to get prices under control now. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
As a small child, Basma Hamid's face was severely burned. And after years of struggling to find the right cosmetics to camouflage her scars, she developed her own 40-shade foundation brand. And it's getting support from a beauty industry giant. The makeup industry is trying to diversify their product lines, but as Sophia Harris tells us, people with darker skin still feel left out.
First up, we have Basma Hamid, founder of Basma Beauty.
Basma Hamid is living her childhood dream to create her own cosmetics.
She has a 40-shade foundation line called Basma, now selling at beauty giant Sephora.
It's an amazing feeling.
At a panel discussion on diversity in Toronto, Sephora invited Hamid to share her story.
It's been a very long journey. When I was 2 years old, I suffered from third-degree burns. It was in a kitchen accident where hot oil ended up spilling on my face.
It happened in her native country, Iraq. Almost half of Hamid's face was scarred. She tried to cover it up, but couldn't find a foundation that worked.
I had a lot of discoloration in my burn, so it was very difficult. I had many challenges. I always struggled even finding my shade, so that's why I made sure I launched my brand with 40 different colors. We want to make sure that everybody feels included.
The beauty industry has been criticized in the past for not being inclusive. Now that's changing.
It's critical that we are truly reflecting the community we represent.
Thomas Haupt is Sephora Canada's country general manager. The company partnered with Hamid as part of its commitment to sell more brands with diverse owners.
She is at the core of all we're trying to accomplish for both our clients and our teams.
Still, Hamid faces challenges, such as stiff competition.
Our brand new powder foundation at Fenty Beauty.
Pop star Rihanna's Fenty Beauty brand boasts a foundation with more than 50 shades.
I have Basma Beauty shade 001 right here.
Hamid also recently faced criticism from beauty TikToker Gloria George, who said the foundation's darkest hue isn't dark enough for her skin tone.
Companies should make our shade.
But I have a hard time finding foundation.
Cheryl Thompson is a professor at Toronto Metropolitan University and has written a book about the black beauty industry. She says even though foundations have become more inclusive, they often still lack darker shades.
And they just haven't been putting the science into developing the products that are actually going to address all the little undertones in black skin.
In response to the TikTok complaint, Hamid spent more than 2 months developing 2 deeper shades for her line.
I don't want anybody to feel like they're left out.
Hamid says customer feedback will guide her brand because everyone should be able to find their match. Sophia Harris, CBC News, Toronto.
Meanwhile, in Finland,
Team Canada has done it again. Gold at the World Hockey Championship.
Team Canada defeated Team Germany 5-2, winning the Ice Hockey World Championship. Germany led for most of the game, but Canada refused to let up. Forward Sammy Blais scored the winning goal 5 minutes into the third period. The win gives Canada its 28th gold medal at the tournament. This is The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Chris O'Neill Yates. You can listen to this program anytime on the CBC Listen app or on the CBC News YouTube channel. Starting Mondays, you can download a special curated edition of the program featuring our favorite stories from the weekend. New York's iconic Broadway theater is being transformed into a nightclub. A revival of the immersive disco-themed musical Here Lies Love is in the works, and audiences will be able to dance along with the actors on stage. The decade-spanning musical is set in the Philippines, and it'll be the first Broadway show with an all-Filipino cast. Chris Reyes reports.
Inside a church basement in New York, there's a kind of atmosphere you'd typically find in a big Filipino family party. But this is no fam jam. Instead, it's history in the making, as the entire cast of the musical Here Lies Love makes their public debut. The entire company is Filipino, a first for Broadway.
I mean, we're extremely proud, right? And also, yes, it is overdue.
An absolute legend of Broadway and of the Philippines, Lea Salonga.
Tony winner Lea Salonga, who made her own history as the original Miss Saigon back in 1989, is Broadway's biggest Filipino star. She's also one of the show's producers and actors and helped find all that Filipino talent.
I need a minute to process this because it's never been seen before. It's kind of unprecedented. So it's something that I felt incredibly proud of.
Here Lies Love isn't just an all-Filipino cast, it's a Filipino story.
I know
disco-themed musical about former Philippines First Lady Imelda Marcos, wife of the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos, and their family's rise and fall from power, created by musicians David Byrne and Fatboy Slim and writer Alex Timbers. The show first hit the stage in 2013 off-Broadway. This summer, it makes a comeback with a historic cast. Jose Lana, an industry veteran actor who's been in The King and I and Rent, is playing the former Philippine president.
We're hopefully adding now to a library of Asian roles that Filipinos can play.
Ariel Jacobs is playing Imelda Marcos. Her last role was as Jasmine in the Australian production of Aladdin.
This is the first time I'm getting to play my own heritage, so I feel like I don't have to hide. I feel like I don't have to pretend to be somebody that I'm not.
While the show is being celebrated for making history, its plot is controversial, with some critics calling the show a glossy retelling of the Marcoses' violent and criminal past. An added layer to that, a Marcos is now back in power in the country. From Lana, this defense.
We're showing the party that the Marcoses had for 20 years, but we're also telling a story about how the hangover happened after that party.
Smiling. Yes, po. Yes, po. It's all smiles as the cast gets ready to officially open the show in July. And at least at this gathering, the focus is on celebrating history and the promise it brings. Both Lana and Salonga know all too well about the struggles it took to get to this moment.
I'm most excited about the future projects that are written by Filipinos, where they're writing their own stories.
Hey, we were able to do it for Here Lies Love. We'll be able to do it for another show.
A first for Broadway, but also a blooming of Filipino talent taking center stage.
It's more fun where?
In the Philippines! Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
I can't believe how lucky I am. I am so lucky to be.
As Chris told us, Here Lies Love is all about former Philippines First Lady Imelda Marcos. From her early days as a beauty queen to meeting Ferdinand Marcos in the 1950s to the end of the Marcos regime 30 years later. The pulsating disco beats by David Byrne and Fatboy Slim mirroring Imelda's flashy, some might say garish lifestyle. But as Byrne said back in 2012, there is one famous detail about Imelda's life that audiences won't hear about.
First thing they have in their head is, this is the woman with the shoes. Well, the shoes are never, ever mentioned.
That's right, shoes. Imelda Marcos was said to have some 3,000 pairs, though she denied the figure, saying she only had a measly 1,060 pairs of shoes. Regardless of the true number, those shoes were held up as symbols of the rampant corruption of the Marcos regime. Before they were removed from office in 1986, the Marcoses reportedly plundered billions of dollars from government coffers. While living in exile in Hawaii, Imelda Marcos was interviewed by the CBC's Fifth Estate, where she justified her extravagant spending as an act of love.
As First Lady, I have to practically flaunt love and beauty so that the 50 million Filipinos will see what is to love and what is to positively feel and what is perfection.
For his part, David Byrne told our Chris Reyes that despite the upbeat music and bright lights, Here Lies Love is not a celebration of the Marcos regime, but a cautionary tale, one he says is more relevant now than when it was written over a decade ago.
Back then it seemed more like a Philippine story. And now it seems like, oh, democracy's been threatened around the world, even in this country. And so it's very important, I think, for people to see, and very inspiring for people to see how people in the Philippines dealt with that and how they changed things back in the day.
I'm gonna learn how to make an impression.
We'll leave you with a little more from Here Lies Love. This is Walk Like a Woman. You've been listening to The World This Weekend. I'm Chris O'Neill Yates in St. John's. Good night.